7 months pregnant. She needs to marry the rival millionaire to save her family's company. But he doesn't know the baby is his. Isabella Martinez watched the Manhattan landscape through the windows of her 45th floor office, her fingers instinctively resting on her 7-month-old womb. The empire her grandfather had built over decades, Martinez Global Technologies, was about to crumble, and the weight of this reality consumed her as much as the secret she carried. "Miss Martinez, Mr. Alexander Rhodes has arrived for the meeting," her assistant announced over the intercom. A deep sigh escaped her lips as she adjusted the black blazer that disguised her pregnancy. Alexander Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Enterprises and her biggest rival for the last 3 years, was also the man who, without knowing it, would be the father of her child. That night in Aspen, 7 months ago, during the technology conference, had changed everything. A moment of shared vulnerability, a few glasses of wine, and the tension of years of rivalry turned into something completely different. The next morning, they both agreed to treat it as a mistake and never mention it again. "You can send him in, Regina," Isabella replied, preparing herself for the meeting that could define the future of generations. Alexander entered the room with the same imposing presence as always. He was tall, with his well-lived 40s evident in a few gray hairs at the temples, wearing an impeccable Italian suit. His blue eyes, usually cold at business meetings, met hers with a mixture of triumph and something else that Isabella couldn't or wouldn't decipher. "Isabella," he greeted her formally, "you look different." "Mr. Rhodes," she replied, maintaining the professionalism that the situation demanded. "I thank you for coming in person. After 3 months of negotiating through lawyers, I thought it was time we talked face to face," he said, taking a seat in the chair opposite her desk. "Especially considering your current situation." Isabella's heart raced. "My situation? Martinez Global Technologies is on the verge of bankruptcy, Isabella. Its latest software development projects have failed. Its shares have fallen by 60% in the last quarter, and its main investors are jumping ship." She straightened her posture, ignoring the unease that pregnancy brought. "And you're here to watch the fall?" "I'm here to offer a solution." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "An agreement that would benefit both companies." "What kind of deal?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air like a sentence. Isabella felt her son stir, as if he too were reacting to the proposal. "Pardon," she managed to say, her voice firmer than she felt. "It's simple," Alexander continued, his voice calculatedly controlled. "We get married. We merge the companies. Martinez Global Technologies becomes a subsidiary of Rhodes Enterprises, keeping its name and legacy, but with renewed capital in management. Your employees keep their jobs. Your grandfather keeps his seat on the board as chairman emeritus. And you?" "And me?" she asked, feeling the trap closing in. "You become my wife and co-CEO of the unified company." Isabella stood up slowly, walking over to the window to hide her troubled expression. The proposal was exactly what she needed to save the company. The jobs of thousands of employees, her family's legacy. But the price? "Why now, Alexander? Why a wedding?" He stood up too, coming closer to her. "Because despite our rivalry, there's always been something more between us, Isabella. That night in Aspen, we agreed not to talk about it," she interrupted him abruptly. "And I see you've moved on," he commented, his gaze dropping to her belly. "Congratulations, by the way. I didn't know you were in a relationship." The comment hit her like an arrow. If only he'd known. If he had known that the child was his, the fruit of that one night. "Do I have a week to accept your proposal?" she asked, changing the subject. 3 days, he replied. "The market won't wait, and neither will your creditors." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her choices. Marry the father of her child without him knowing the truth, or watch as her entire family's work was destroyed? "I'll consider your proposal," she finally said. Alexander nodded and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "One thing, Isabella. If you accept my proposal, I demand absolute honesty from now on. No secrets between us." The irony of that demand almost made her laugh hysterically. How could she promise honesty when she was already going to start the marriage with the biggest secret of all? After he left, Isabella collapsed in her chair, allowing the tears to finally fall. Her phone rang. It was her grandfather, probably anxious to know the outcome of the meeting. Life had become a moral labyrinth from which she could see no way out. Every choice seemed wrong. Every path led to more lies or the destruction of everything her family had built. Stroking her belly, Isabella whispered, "Forgive me, little one. Mama will do what needs to be done to protect us all." The decision was made. Even if her heart protested, she would marry Alexander Rhodes, save the company, and carry on his secret for as long as it took. The price of survival would be her conscience, but it was a price she was willing to pay. The sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, painting the sky in orange tones that contrasted with the growing shadows between the skyscrapers. Like that twilight, Isabella felt like she was on the threshold between two worlds, about to plunge into a darkness from which she might never fully emerge. Isabella watched the city through the windows of her Park Avenue apartment, the night lights of Manhattan creating a kaleidoscope of reflections on the glass. After Alexander's disturbing proposal, she needed a moment to reorganize her thoughts. The phone rang insistently. Her grandfather, Antonio Martinez, was still waiting for news of the meeting. With a heavy sigh, she finally answered, "Mi pequeña." Her grandfather's familiar voice sounded concerned. "How did it go?" "Grandpa." Isabella hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. "Alexander made a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "He wants to marry me," she replied, the reality of those words still sounding surreal. A business marriage. Martinez Global Technologies would become a subsidiary of Rhodes Enterprises, but would retain its identity and employees. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Antonio Martinez had dedicated 50 years of his life to building the company from scratch, transforming it into one of the largest technology companies in the country. Now, at the age of 78, he was forced to see his legacy threatened. "Isabella," he finally spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "You don't have to do this. We can find another solution." "What other solution, Grandpa? We've tried everything. Investors are abandoning ship. Our shares have plummeted. And the new software project has been a failure." "But marrying Alexander Rhodes?" The concern in his voice was palpable. "That man has been our rival for years. How can you trust him?" Isabella closed her eyes, memories of Aspen flooding her mind. The side of Alexander that few knew: vulnerable, passionate, human, the man behind the mask of the ruthless businessman. "Sometimes we need to trust our enemies more than our friends," she replied, repeating an old saying her grandfather used to say. "What about the baby?" Antonio asked softly. "You never told me who the father is." Isabella's heart raced. Her grandfather was the only person who knew about her pregnancy, apart from her doctor. She had managed to keep it a secret from the rest of the corporate world through strategically chosen outfits and carefully framed video conferences. "The father isn't in the picture," she replied, the lie burning in her throat. "It was my decision to have this baby alone." "And Alexander? What did he say about you being pregnant?" He thinks I've been in a relationship. He didn't ask for details." Antonio sighed deeply. "Isabella, mi amor, you're putting yourself in a very complicated situation. If he finds out..." "He won't find out," she interrupted him, more to convince herself than him. "Not now. Not when there's so much at stake." At that moment, her baby moved, as if protesting against the lie. Isabella stroked her belly, a wave of guilt washing over her. "I have 3 days to give an answer," she continued. "I need your blessing, Grandpa. I can't make this decision alone." "You've never been alone, pequeña," Antonio replied affectionately. "Ever since your parents left, I promised that I would always be by your side. If you believe that this is the right path, then you have my support." The tears that Isabella had been holding back all day finally began to fall. The memory of her parents, killed in a car accident when she was just 12, still hurt like an open wound. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered. After hanging up, Isabella walked to her room, where the still disassembled crib was waiting in its box. She had planned to assemble it this weekend, to turn the guest room into a nursery. Now, all her plans would have to be reconsidered. Her cell phone vibrated a message from Alexander. "Dinner tomorrow?" We need to discuss the details if your answer is positive. 8 p.m. at Lou Bernardine. Isabella typed an affirmative reply, feeling the weight of each letter. In less than 24 hours, she would be face to face again with the man who, unbeknownst to her, was the father of her child, discussing the terms of a marriage based on business necessity and secrets. Lying in her bed that night, Isabella relived the night in Aspen, the way Alexander had looked at her during the conference gala dinner, the dance they had shared, the candid conversation about their lives, dreams, and fears, how a years-long rivalry dissolved in a matter of hours, giving way to something deeper, truer. "Your father is a complicated man," she whispered to her womb, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "But he's also a good man. I hope that one day you can really get to know him, and that he can forgive us." The distant sound of New York sirens created a strange symphony with her agitated thoughts. In 3 days, she would have to give an answer that would change not only her future, but that of 3 generations of the Martinez family. Her grandfather's company, the child in her womb, her own life, everything depended on her decision. With one last caress on her belly, Isabella closed her eyes, trying to find peace amidst the whirlwind of emotions that consumed her. Tomorrow would be another day, another battle, another step towards an uncertain but necessary future. Lou Bernardine sparkled like a jewel in the night city, its elegant interior reflecting the refinement that had made the restaurant one of the most prestigious in New York. Isabella adjusted the black dress she had carefully chosen to minimize her pregnancy. Although at 7 months this was becoming increasingly difficult, Alexander was already waiting for her at a discreet table at the back of the restaurant. When he saw her approaching, he stood up, his eyes roaming over her figure in a way that made her shudder internally. "You look stunning," he commented, pulling out a chair for her. The gentlemanly gesture, so characteristic of him, brought up memories of Aspen that she was struggling to suppress. "Thank you," she replied dryly, trying to maintain her professional focus. "Shall we discuss the terms?" Alexander gestured to the sommelier, who approached with a bottle of mineral water. "I thought we could have dinner first. We have a lot to talk about besides the legal aspects." Dinner was served amid palpable tension. Isabella watched Alexander methodically cut into his fillet, remembering how those same hands had run over her body that winter's night. Her son moved, as if sensing her agitation. "So," Alexander began, wiping his lips with his napkin, "have you made up your mind?" Isabella placed the cutlery on the plate, still half full. "Before I answer, I need to understand exactly what you're proposing. A marriage of convenience is one thing, but there are complications you need to consider." "You mean the baby?" Alexander leaned forward slightly. "I've already made it clear that this is not an impediment. In fact, it could be beneficial for our public image, a marriage that unites not just companies, but families." The irony of the situation almost made Isabella laugh. If only he knew how true his words were. "What about the child's father?" he asked, his voice controlled, but with a note of something that could be jealousy. "Won't there be legal complications?" "No," she replied firmly. "As I said, he's not in the picture." Alexander nodded, although his eyes revealed that there were more questions he wanted to ask. "Well then, let's get down to terms. First, the marriage needs to look genuine. No rumors about business arrangements. Second, we live together. I have a penthouse on 5th Avenue that would be perfect for a family." Family. The word echoed in Isabella's mind like a bell. "Third," he continued, "I want to be involved in the child's life. If we're going to be husband and wife, I'll be a present stepfather." Isabella felt her blood run cold in her veins. The thought of Alexander raising his own child without knowing the truth was both painful and terrifying. "Why?" she asked abruptly. "Why care about a child that isn't yours?" Alexander was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on his wine glass. "Maybe because I understand what it's like to grow up without a father figure present. My father was always too busy building his empire to really be a father." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. It was the same tone he had used in Aspen, when they shared personal stories in the early hours of the morning. "There's one more thing," he added, his expression turning serious. "I want a real marriage, Isabella, not just on paper." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I hope we can build something real. There's already an attraction between us. There always has been. Isabella felt her heart racing. Alexander, don't deny it, he interrupted her gently. That night in Aspen, I thought we agreed not to talk about it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe it's time we did. What happened between us? It was a mistake, she finished quickly, although each word hurt like a wound. We were two lonely adults. There was alcohol involved. Is that really what you believe? Alexander challenged her, his intense eyes fixed on hers. That it was just a mistake? Isabella looked away, unable to hold that gaze without betraying herself. Her son had chosen that moment to kick her particularly hard, as if protesting against her lies. I accept your proposal, she finally said, changing the subject, but I have my own conditions. Alexander leaned back in his chair, resuming his businesslike posture. Go on. First, I want to keep my apartment. Even if I live with you, I need my own space. Secondly, when the baby is born, I'll have the final say on its upbringing. And third, she hesitated for a moment, I need time. If you want a real marriage, you need to give me the space to get there naturally. Alexander considered her words for a moment before nodding. Fair conditions. The lawyers can prepare the documents tomorrow. As for the wedding itself, I suggest 2 weeks. The market is volatile. We need to act quickly. Isabella agreed mechanically, her mind already anticipating the complications to come. In 2 weeks, she would be the wife of the man she didn't know would father her child. A toast? Alexander proposed, raising his glass of wine as she picked up her glass of water. To our future? The crystal tinkled softly, the sound echoing like an omen of what was to come. Isabella watched Alexander's face, wondering how long she could keep his secret, and more importantly, if he would ever be able to forgive her when the truth came out. Preparations for the wedding were progressing at a frantic pace. In just 10 days, Isabella saw her life completely reorganized by a team of planners hired by Alexander. The official announcement of the union between the Martinez and Rhodes families had generated exactly the expected impact on the financial market. The shares of Martinez Global Technologies began a gradual recovery. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Isabella entered the office of Dr. Marcus Bennett, her obstetrician, for another routine appointment. The waiting room was practically empty, except for a pregnant woman leafing through a magazine. Miss Martinez, the receptionist called out, the doctor is ready to see you. Upon entering the office, Isabella was greeted by the warm smile of Dr. Bennett, a man in his 50s who had been with her since the beginning of her pregnancy. How are you feeling, Isabella? He asked as she settled into the chair. Physically fine, doctor. Emotionally? She hesitated. Let's just say things are complicated. The doctor nodded, already aware of the situation from the news. I saw about your marriage in the papers. Is Alexander Rhodes the father? Isabella felt her heart racing. Dr. Bennett, I need your word that everything we talk about here remains absolutely confidential. You know that my professional confidentiality is guaranteed, he replied seriously. But as your doctor, I need to express my concern. Stress is not good for the baby, especially at this stage. I know, she sighed, stroking her belly, but I don't have a choice. My family's company. There's always a choice, Isabella. The doctor interrupted her gently. The question is whether we are prepared for the consequences of our choices. During the examination, Isabella looked at the monitor where her son appeared in black and white images. It was a boy she had found out the month before, but had chosen to keep the sex a secret too. He's perfectly healthy, Dr. Bennett commented, moving the transducer. Normal development, strong heartbeat. Do you want to hear it? The rhythmic, accelerated sound of her son's heart filled the room, bringing tears to Isabella's eyes. It was the same strong, determined sound that she imagined she had inherited from Alexander. Dr. Bennett, she began, as she wiped the gel from her belly after the examination, if Alexander comes looking for you after the wedding, my professional ethics are unquestionable, he assured her. But I suggest you consider telling him the truth before it's too late. Secrets have a habit of coming out at the most inopportune moments. Leaving the office, Isabella found Alexander waiting in the lobby of the building. Her heart almost stopped. She hadn't expected to see him there. Alexander, what are you doing here? I came to pick you up, he replied, his eyes scanning her figure with concern. "Regina mentioned your doctor's appointment. Is everything all right?" "Yes, just routine," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "You needn't have worried." "Of course I did," he said, guiding her to his car. "In less than a week we'll be man and wife. Your well-being and that of the baby are my priorities now." In the car, Alexander drove in silence through the streets of Manhattan. Isabella could feel his occasional glance, as if he wanted to say something more. "There's something I want to show you," he finally said, turning onto Fifth Avenue. They stopped in front of the imposing building where Alexander's penthouse was located. In the private elevator, he held her hand, a gesture that took her by surprise because of its naturalness. "Close your eyes," he ordered as he opened the penthouse door. Isabella obeyed, feeling guided by him through the apartment. When he asked her to open her eyes, she found herself in a room perfectly decorated in soft shades of green and yellow. "It's the baby's room," Alexander explained, his voice soft. "I hired the best designers. I wanted to do something neutral, since we don't know the sex." Isabella felt her legs go weak. There was the crib she had dreamed of, delicate furniture, a soft rug, a nursing chair by the window overlooking Central Park. On the wall, a delicate mural with little airplanes and clouds. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice breaking. "Because I want you and the baby to feel at home," he replied, moving closer. "I know our arrangement started out of necessity, but," he hesitated, "something rare for Alexander Rhodes. That night in Aspen wasn't a mistake for me, Isabella." She felt her son moving, as if responding to his father's closeness. Alexander must have noticed something in her expression, because his eyes turned to her belly. "May I?" he asked hesitantly, holding out his hand. With her heart racing, Isabella nodded. When Alexander's hand touched her belly, the baby kicked hard, as if recognizing her father's touch. His eyes widened in surprise at the moment. "He's strong," Alexander commented in amazement. "Yes," Isabella replied, fighting back tears. "He is." At that moment, watching Alexander marvel at his own son's movements without knowing it, Isabella felt the weight of her lie more than ever. The beautifully decorated room, the care for detail, the genuine concern in his actions, all this showed a side of Alexander that few knew. "Isabella," he began, still with his hand on her belly, "I know I've asked for a royal wedding, but I want you to know that there's no pressure. We can build it in our own time, in our own way." She nodded, unable to trust his voice at that moment. How could I build something real on a foundation of lies? How could she accept so much love and care knowing that she was denying Alexander the right to know his own son? The sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, painting the room in golden hues through the large windows. In a week, she would be Mrs. Rhodes, and this would be her home. But as she watched Alexander admiring the room she had so lovingly prepared, Isabella wondered if she would ever be able to turn this house into a real home without the crushing weight of her secret. The week leading up to the wedding turned Isabella's apartment into an organized chaos of boxes, dresses, and papers. Sarah Miller, the renowned designer hired by Alexander, was making the final adjustments to the wedding dress, trying to disguise the advanced pregnancy with strategic folds of fabric. "Breathe, darling," Sarah instructed, adjusting a pin. "The empire cut favors your condition, but I need you to stand absolutely still." Isabella watched her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman she saw. The dress was a masterpiece of French silk and lace, but her eyes were fixed on her expression. There was something haunted about her, as if she carried an invisible weight. Miss Martinez? Regina, her assistant, entered the room with a telephone in hand. "Dr. Bennett is on the line. He says it's urgent." Isabella's heart raced. "Can you give me a moment?" As soon as she was alone, she answered the call with trembling hands. "Dr. Bennett?" "Isabella, I'm sorry to interrupt your preparations, but Alexander Rhodes was in my office today." The world seemed to stop. "What? How?" "He came to request your full medical history apparently. It's an insurance company requirement for the joint policy after the wedding." "And what did you say?" she asked, sitting down carefully so as not to wrinkle her dress. "I kept my word about confidentiality, but Isabella..." He asked specific questions about the date of conception. "He's doing the math." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "Thank you for letting me know, doctor." After hanging up, she sat for a few moments, trying to control her breathing. Her son moved, as he always did when she was agitated. "Mrs. Rhodes?" Sarah called from the other side of the door. "Can we continue?" Mrs. Rhodes. The name that would soon be hers sounded like an accusation, the rest of the dress fitting past like a blur. When she was finally alone, Isabella called the only person who could understand her situation. "Grandpa, I need you." An hour later, Antonio Martinez entered his granddaughter's apartment, his imposing figure contrasting with the concern in his eyes. "Mi pequeña," he said, hugging her carefully. "What happened?" Isabella told him about Alexander's visit to the doctor while they served tea on the balcony. The afternoon sun painted Manhattan golden, but she barely noticed the beauty of the view. "He'll find out," she whispered. "Sooner or later, he'll realize that the dates coincide with Aspen." Antonio held his granddaughter's hand. "Maybe it's time to tell him the truth before it's too late." "And risk losing everything? The company, the wedding? What's worth more, Isabella? The company or your integrity? The money or the chance for your son to grow up knowing that his parents were honest with each other?" Her grandfather's words struck deep. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of your reaction. Afraid of having waited too long. Fear is natural, mi amor. But lies have short legs, as your grandmother always said." Just then, the doorbell rang. Regina answered it and, seconds later, Alexander stepped out onto the balcony. His gaze alternated between Isabella and Antonio, as if he sensed the tension in the air. "Sorry to interrupt," he said formally. "Antonio, I didn't know you'd be here." "I was just leaving," he replied, getting up. Before leaving, he kissed his granddaughter's forehead and whispered, "Follow your heart." Alone, Isabella and Alexander remained in a charged silence for a few moments. "I visited your doctor today," he finally said, sitting down where Antonio had been. "I know," she replied, her heart hammering. "Something interesting happened during the visit," Alexander continued, his tone calculatedly neutral. "When I mentioned Aspen, I noticed a change in his expression." Isabella felt her son move, as if also reacting to the tension of the moment. "Alexander, 7 months," he interrupted her, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're 7 months along. The conference in Aspen was 7 months ago." "I'm not a stupid man, Isabella." The tears she had been holding back began to fall. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He stood up abruptly, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. "After the wedding? After the birth? When our son turns 18. "Our son," she repeated softly, noticing how the words made him pause. "Why?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Why hide it from me?" Isabella stood up with difficulty, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Because that morning in Aspen, you said it was a mistake. Because when I found out I was pregnant, our companies were at war. Because every day that passed made it harder to tell you the truth." Alexander approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the womb carrying his son. "May I?" Just like that day in the nursery, Isabella nodded. This time, when he touched her belly, it was with the knowledge that it was her child moving under his hand. "It's a boy," she revealed softly. Alexander closed his eyes, visibly trying to process all the information. "The room, when you saw the baby's room. It was like my heart was being broken into 1,000 pieces," she added. "Seeing you so dedicated, so careful, without knowing. I need time," he finally said, pulling away, "to process all this. The wedding, I understand if you want to call it off," Isabella said, feeling like her world was falling apart. "No," Alexander replied firmly, "but we need to rethink everything. I can't enter into a marriage based on lies, Isabella. Even if this particular lie," he looked down at his belly again, "changes everything." When he left, Isabella collapsed on the sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. Her phone vibrated a message from her grandfather. "The truth sets you free, mi pequeña. Now it's time to rebuild on honest foundations." Stroking her belly, Isabella whispered to her son, "I'm sorry, little one. Mommy finally did the right thing." The sun was setting over Manhattan, and with it, The weight of the secret Isabella had carried for so long. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in 7 months, she could breathe freely, even if the air was still laden with unshed tears and unspoken words. The sun had barely risen when Isabella woke up in her Park Avenue apartment, her body aching after a restless night. Alexander's words still echoed in her mind. "I need time." 3 days had passed since the revelation, and his silence was deafening. The wedding, originally scheduled for 2 days from now, was in an indefinite limbo. Suppliers were calling constantly, the media was speculating about a possible cancellation, and Martinez Global Technology shares were starting to fluctuate again. "Miss Martinez?" Regina called through the bedroom door. "Mr. Martinez is here." Isabella found her grandfather in the living room, a worried expression on his aged face. "How are you, mi pequeña?" "Surviving," she replied, sitting down heavily on the sofa. "Any news from Rhodes Enterprises?" Antonio shook his head. "The board is agitated. Without the wedding, the merger agreement could fall apart. And it's all my fault," Isabella whispered, the tears threatening to fall again. "No," her grandfather interrupted her firmly. "For years, I carried the weight of turning our family business into a giant corporation. Perhaps it was this weight that led you to hide the truth for so long." Just then, Isabella's phone vibrated, a message from Alexander. "Can we meet? Central Park, near Belvedere Castle, in an hour." Her heart raced. "He wants to see me," she told her grandfather, showing him the message. "Then go," Antonio replied, squeezing her hand. "It's time to face the consequences with courage." Central Park was relatively empty that fall morning. Isabella walked slowly to the meeting point, her loose dress swaying in the breeze. She found Alexander watching the lake, his hands in his coat pockets. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "Alexander, I've spent the last 3 days trying to understand," he interrupted her, finally turning to face her. "I've relived every moment in Aspen, every conversation, every look. How could I not have realized it before?" "I was very careful," she admitted. "Fear made me an excellent liar." "Afraid of what, exactly?" "Of everything," she replied, taking a seat on a nearby bench. "Fear of your rejection, fear of losing the company, fear of disappointing my grandfather. But above all, fear of admitting that that night meant much more than a mistake." Alexander sat down next to her, keeping a calculated distance. "When I decorated that room, when I chose every detail with you in the baby in mind, there was already something inside me that knew." "What do you mean?" "The mural with the airplanes," he explained, a sad smile on his lips. "In Aspen, you told me about your childhood dream of becoming a pilot before you took over the family business. It was the first thing I chose for the bedroom." Isabella felt her son move, as he always did when Alexander was around. "He moves more when you're close," she revealed softly. Alexander looked down at his belly, raw emotion in his eyes. "May I?" When he touched her belly this time, it was different. There were no more secrets between them, just the pure truth of their son responding to his father's touch. "The wedding," Alexander began, his hand still on her belly, "can't happen tomorrow." Isabella felt her heart sink, but nodded. "I understand." "No, you don't understand," he continued. "It can't happen tomorrow because we need to do it right. Not because of the companies, not because of the media, but for us, for him." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to meet my son's mother, really get to know her. No lies, no corporate games, no outside pressure. I want to understand how that night in Aspen wasn't a mistake, but the beginning of something we've both tried to deny." The tears Isabella had been holding back began to fall freely. "What about the companies?" "Rhodes Enterprises will maintain the investment agreement in Martinez Global Technologies, regardless of an immediate marriage. Your grandfather built something too important to be lost because of our personal problems. Would you do that? For you? For our son?" He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Yes, I would. But on one condition." "What?" "Total honesty from now on. No secrets, no half-truths. If we're going to build something real, it needs to be on a solid foundation." Isabella nodded, feeling as if an immense weight had been lifted from her shoulders. And where do we start? How about the beginning? Alexander suggested, a small smile appearing on his lips. Tell me about that night in Aspen. Your version. No omissions this time. As the sun rose in the Manhattan sky, Isabella began to tell her story. She talked about how her heart raced when she saw him at the gala dinner, about how the rivalry of years dissolved in a matter of hours, about how, for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen by someone. Alexander listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, or sharing his own perspective. Their son moved gently between them, as if approving of this new honesty between his parents. You know what's funny? She said after a moment's silence. I spent so much time trying to protect everyone, the company, my grandfather, you, that I ended up losing myself in the process. Then we'll find you again, Alexander replied, his voice soft. Together this time. Central Park was beginning to come alive around them, with morning joggers and people walking their dogs. But for Isabella and Alexander, that moment was like a bubble in time, where only they and the little miracle between them existed. What about the baby's room? She asked, remembering the careful details he had chosen. It's still there, waiting for you, he replied. When you're ready? Isabella smiled, for the first time in days feeling real hope. The road ahead would still be complicated, with many difficult conversations and necessary adjustments, but for the first time, she wasn't alone on this journey. A week had passed since the conversation in Central Park. Autumn painted Manhattan in shades of gold and red, reflecting the transformation taking place in Isabella and Alexander's lives. The postponed wedding generated speculative headlines, but for the first time, neither of them cared about public opinion. Isabella was in her office at Martinez Global Technologies, reviewing financial reports, when Regina announced an unexpected visitor. Miss Martinez, Mrs. Rhodes is here. Catherine Rhodes, Alexander's mother and matriarch of the Rhodes family, entered the room with the elegance that characterized her. She was tall, with perfectly groomed gray hair and a penetrating gaze that closely resembled that of her son. Mrs. Rhodes, Isabella started to get up, but Catherine gestured for her to remain seated. Please, dear, in your condition it's best to make yourself comfortable, she said, sitting down in the chair opposite the table. And I think, considering the circumstances, you can call me Catherine. Isabella felt her heart race. Alexander told you? About my grandson? Catherine smiled softly. Yes, last night. I must say it explains a lot about his behavior over the last few months. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Isabella began, but Catherine interrupted her with a gesture. I'm not here to judge, dear. I'm here because I know my son, and I know he must be torturing himself with this whole situation. Isabella frowned, confused. But he seems to be coping well. Alexander has always been a master at hiding his emotions, Catherine explained, leaning forward slightly. Ever since his father died when he was only 15, he's taken on the responsibility of being the man of the family. He rarely allows anyone to see beyond the facade of the successful businessman. In Aspen, Isabella hesitated, but continued, it was the first time I saw him really vulnerable. Catherine nodded, understanding. That conference, he came back different, lighter, somehow. Now I understand why. The baby chose that moment to move, making Isabella smile involuntarily. Catherine noticed the gesture. May I? She asked, holding out her hand. When Catherine touched Isabella's belly, her face lit up with genuine emotion. He's fussy, like Alexander was. I used to say he was building empires even before he was born. Mrs. Rhodes. Catherine, Isabella corrected herself. Why did you really come to see me? The Rhodes matriarch straightened up, her gaze becoming more serious. Because I want you to understand something about my son. Alexander grew up believing that he had to be perfect, the perfect son, the perfect businessman, the perfect successor. But being a father terrifies him more than he'll ever admit. Because of his own father? Partly, Catherine confirmed. Richard was a difficult man, more concerned with profits than family relationships. Alexander vowed to be different, but the fear of failure? Well, let's just say that some wounds take generations to heal. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt him. I was so afraid. Fear makes us make mistakes, Catherine said softly. but it also gives us the opportunity to grow through them. Alexander is learning that now, just like you. Just then, Isabella's phone vibrated a message from Alexander. "Dinner tonight? I have something to show you." Catherine smiled when she saw the expression on Isabella's face. "Go on, and remember, my son may seem strong as steel, but his heart is more vulnerable than he lets the world see." After Catherine's departure, Isabella spent the rest of the afternoon lost in thought. The Rhodes matriarch's words had illuminated aspects of Alexander that she had never fully considered. In the evening, when she arrived at his apartment on Fifth Avenue, she found Alexander on the rooftop, an intimate dinner prepared under the Manhattan stars. "I thought we could start again," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "No pressure, no expectations, just us." Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, abandoned dreams, hidden fears. It was like Aspen all over again, but this time without the weight of rivalry or secrets. "I have something to show you," Alexander said after dessert, guiding her to his office. On the table were architectural plans, the design of a house in the Hamptons. "It's beautiful," Isabella commented, studying the drawings. "It's for us," he revealed softly. "For when we're ready. A place where our son can grow up away from the pressures of the city, where we can build something new, together." Isabella felt her heart race. "Alexander, I'm not asking for an answer now," he continued. "I just want you to know that when I think of the future, you and our son are part of it, regardless of arranged marriages or corporate mergers." The baby moved, as he always did when he heard his father's voice. Alexander placed his hand on Isabella's belly, marveling at his son's movements. "Your mother visited me today," Isabella revealed softly. Alexander raised his eyebrows in surprise. She helped me understand a few things. About you, about us, about fears that pass from generation to generation." He was silent for a moment, his hands still on her belly. "I'm afraid," he finally admitted. "Afraid of not being the father he deserves." "I'm afraid too," Isabella confessed. "But maybe we can be afraid together. And maybe that will make everything a little less scary." Alexander pulled her closer, their foreheads touching gently. Between them, his son moved gently, as if sealing that moment of shared vulnerability. The city shone beyond the windows, but inside that office, a new kind of light was beginning to emerge, the light of understanding, forgiveness, and, perhaps most importantly, hope. October was progressing in New York, and with it, the transformations in Isabella and Alexander's lives were taking shape. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue, once a symbol of Alexander's solitary empire, gradually became a home. Isabella spent more and more time there, bringing her presence into the previously austere spaces. That Saturday morning, Isabella was organizing some things in the baby's room when she found an old photograph lying behind one of the drawers. In the yellowed image, a young Alexander, no more than 15, stood next to his father, Richard Rhodes, in front of the first office of Rhodes Enterprises. This was taken a week before he died. Alexander's voice surprised her from the doorway. Isabella turned around, still holding the photo. "You two look a lot alike." "That's what everyone says," he replied, stepping closer. "But I hope the similarities end at looks." "Your mother told me a bit about him," Isabella said softly, noticing how Alexander tensed slightly when he heard this. "Catherine was always good at softening the stories," he commented, picking up the photograph. "The truth is that Richard Rhodes was an obsessive man. The company was his life, his mistress, his religion. Family? It was just a detail in his grand plan." Isabella put her hand on her belly, feeling her son move. "Is that why you put off having a family of your own for so long?" Alexander was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the contours of the old photograph. "Maybe, or maybe I was waiting for the right person, even if I didn't know it." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Regina, who was now dividing her time between their offices, announced the arrival of Antonio Martinez. Isabella's grandfather entered the baby's room, his eyes shining as he took in the surroundings. "I see you've been busy," he commented, noting the recent changes to the decor. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" Isabella asked, surprised by the unexpected visit. "I've brought something," he replied, pulling a small package from his blazer pocket. Alexander came to see me yesterday, asking about family traditions. It reminded me of something. Antonio opened the package, revealing a small silver locket. It was your grandmother's, Isabella. She wore it throughout her pregnancy with your mother, and then your mother wore it when she was pregnant with you. Isabella took the locket with trembling hands, opening it to find an old photo of her grandmother with her mother as a baby. "Grandpa, there's room for one more photo on the other side," Antonio commented, looking meaningfully at Alexander. "Maybe for a new generation." Alexander watched the scene with restrained emotion, recognizing the deep significance of the moment. It was more than just a gift, it was the acceptance of his entry into the Martinez family, the blessing for the new chapter they were beginning. "Señor Martinez," Alexander began, his voice softer than usual, "this means a lot." "Call me Antonio," the patriarch replied with a smile. "After all, we'll soon be family, won't we?" Isabella felt the tears start to fall, a mixture of pregnancy hormones and genuine emotion. Alexander wrapped an arm around her, his other hand instinctively going to her belly, where her son was actively moving. "He's fussy today," Alexander commented, amazed as always by the movements. "As you were," Catherine Rhodes remarked, appearing in the bedroom doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but Regina let me in." The baby's room now brought together the three generations of the Rhodes and Martinez families. Catherine approached Antonio, a silent understanding passing between the patriarchs who had seen their empires grow as rivals and were now united through their descendants. "Isabella," Catherine said, taking something out of her bag, "I brought something too." Alexander had this in his room when he was a baby. It was a small musical mobile with silver stars and airplanes. "It matches the mural perfectly," Isabella commented, thrilled. "Maybe it's fate," Catherine smiled, looking meaningfully at her son and Isabella. "Some things are written in the stars, even if it takes us a while to recognize them." Alexander picked up the mobile, carefully installing it over the cradle. As the soft melody began to play, filling the room with delicate notes, Isabella felt her son calm down. "He already recognizes the music," she whispered, amazed. "Children have a wisdom that we adults often lose," Antonio commented. "They know how to recognize what is true, what is genuine love." Catherine approached Isabella, adjusting the locket around her neck. "Something old from the Martinez," she smiled, "and something new from the Rhodes. It seems appropriate. Like our companies," Alexander added. "The legacy of the past coming together with the possibilities of the future." Isabella looked at her reflection in the bedroom mirror with the Martinez locket, the Rhodes mobile spinning gently on the crib, the families reunited in harmony. It was an image that, months ago, would have seemed impossible. "Let's leave you two for a while," Catherine suggested, leading Antonio out of the room. "I think we have a lot to discuss about the future of our families." Alone again, Isabella and Alexander remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything that had just happened. "It's funny," Isabella finally said, "how sometimes we need to lose control of things to find what really matters." Alexander hugged her from behind, his hands resting on the belly where his son was growing. "Maybe the real control lies in knowing when to let go," he replied, "in trusting that some things are bigger than our fears and plans." The soft melody of the mobile continued to play, cradling not only the baby, but also the hopes and dreams of two families who, through love, were finding a new beginning. The first week of November brought a subtle change in the dynamic between Isabella and Alexander. What had begun as a business arrangement had turned into something deeper, truer. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue, once Alexander's exclusive territory, now bore unmistakable touches of Isabella's presence in every room. That Sunday morning, Isabella woke up to the soft sound of rain against the windows. She had slept in the penthouse guest room after a late working dinner with Alexander, going over the last details of the business merger. Her son stirred, as he always did in the early hours of the day. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, stroking his 8-month-old belly. The Martinez locket rested on her nightstand, glowing softly in the diffused light of the rainy morning. "Already awake?" Alexander's voice came from the doorway, where he was standing with a breakfast tray. "I thought you might need some extra energy today." "Today?" Catherine and her planning team arrive in an hour, he reminded her, placing the tray on the bed, to finalize the wedding details. The wedding, after weeks of rebuilding trust and genuine closeness, they had decided to reschedule the ceremony for the end of the month, before the baby was born. This time, it wouldn't be a business deal in disguise, but a real celebration of what they had built. "Your mother is particularly excited," Isabella commented, tasting a still warm croissant. "She never gave up hope of seeing me really happy," Alexander replied, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "Even when I had given up on the possibility myself." Isabella observed his profile against the window, noticing how much lighter he had seemed recently. The weight of loneliness he had always carried on his shoulders had diminished, replaced by an almost palpable expectation for the future. "Alexander," she began hesitantly, "have you thought of names for him?" His eyes lit up at the question. "Actually, yes. I've been researching a few options, but I wanted your opinion on one in particular." "Which one?" "Antonio," he replied softly. "In honor of your grandfather, the man who built an empire with integrity and who, despite our old rivalry, gave me a second chance." Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. Damn pregnancy hormones. Grandpa would be honored. "Antonio Rhodes Martinez," Alexander continued, his hand finding her belly. "A name that unites our families, our legacies." The baby wriggled under his touch, as if approving of the choice. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine, accompanied by a small team of professionals. "Oh, what a lovely scene!" Catherine exclaimed, her eyes shining at the sight of her son and Isabella together. "But we have a lot of work ahead of us. Isabella, darling, I've brought some dress options that have been tailored especially for you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of dress fittings, flower choices, and menu decisions. Unlike their first attempt at marriage, every detail now carried a special meaning, a genuine connection to their stories. "This one," Isabella said, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The dress was an Italian silk creation, with a cut that emphasized her pregnancy rather than trying to hide it. "This is perfect." "Alexander will be speechless," Catherine smiled, adjusting her veil. "Speaking of which, where is he?" As if in answer, they heard voices coming from the hallway. Alexander and Antonio Martinez had arrived with the final documents for the business merger. "Mi pequeña." Antonio entered the room, his eyes watering at the sight of Isabella in her wedding dress. Your mother would be so proud." Isabella hugged her grandfather, feeling the weight of the moment. "She's here, Grandpa." "Somehow, she's here." "Yes," he agreed, touching the locket around her neck. "In every beat of your son's heart, in every moment you smile. She's here." Alexander watched the scene from the doorway, respecting the moment between grandfather and granddaughter. Catherine approached him, adjusting his tie in a motherly gesture. "You finally found your way home," she whispered to her son. "Home?" he repeated, his eyes fixed on Isabella. "Yes, I think so." The afternoon progressed between preparations and decisions, but with a lightness that contrasted sharply with the tension that had marked the first wedding plans. The business merger, once the center of everything, now seemed just a detail in the bigger picture of their lives. When night fell, after everyone had left, Isabella found Alexander in the baby's room. He was setting up a small library, arranging children's books on the shelves. "I found some of my old books in my mother's apartment," he explained, showing her a worn volume of The Little Prince. "I want our son to grow up surrounded by stories, real stories like ours." Isabella approached, picking up the book. "With all the parts? Even the difficult ones?" "Especially the difficult ones," he replied, hugging her from behind. "Because they're the ones that got us here." The Rhodes Mobile rotated gently over the crib, its familiar melody filling the room with notes of hope. Through the window, the lights of Manhattan shone like earthly stars, silent witnesses to a story that had begun with lies and secrets, but had found its way to the truth. "2 weeks," Isabella whispered, thinking of the approaching wedding. "2 weeks," Alexander agreed, his hand resting on the spot where his son was growing. "And then we start our own chapter." The baby wriggled, as he always did when he heard his father's voice, and Isabella smiled, knowing that some stories, even if they start out complicated, find their way to an ending that is not only happy, but true. The morning of the wedding dawned with a peculiar clarity for November in New York. Isabella watched the city wake up from her penthouse bedroom on Fifth Avenue, her wedding dress carefully hung near the window. Her son, as if sensing the importance of the moment, stirred gently. "It's almost time." Catherine Rhodes entered the room, already fully dressed. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Nervous," Isabella admitted, stroking her 8-month belly, "but in a different way from the first time." "That's because this time it's real," Catherine smiled, starting to help with the preparations. "When I married Richard, I was terrified. But with Alexander, I see something different, something real." The hair and makeup team arrived, transforming the room into a small salon. The dress, when finally put on, fit perfectly, enhancing her pregnancy rather than trying to hide it. The Martinez medallion completed the look, carrying the weight of the history of 3 generations. Mi pequeña. Antonio Martinez entered the room, his eyes watering at the sight of his granddaughter. "Are you?" "Don't cry, Grandpa," Isabella smiled, feeling her own tears threaten to fall. "The makeup isn't waterproof yet." "Your mother would be so proud," he continued, holding her hands. "And I know that somehow, she's here today." In another room of the penthouse, Alexander was finishing getting ready, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. His eyes occasionally wandered to the photograph of his father that he kept on his desk, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of the kind of father he wouldn't be. "Nervous?" James, his best friend and godfather, asked. "Strangely not," Alexander replied, a small smile on his lips. "For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure of something." The ceremony was to take place in the Hanging Garden of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a place that combined the grandeur their social positions demanded with the intimacy they desired. When Alexander arrived at the venue, he was amazed by the transformation. White and gold flowers created a path to the altar, with Manhattan serving as a natural backdrop. The guests began to arrive, a carefully selected mix of family, close friends, and a few important associates. It wasn't the social event of the year that the media had been expecting, but something more significant. When the music started, Alexander felt his heart racing. Isabella appeared at the entrance to the garden, led by Antonio. Her dress shone softly in the autumn sun, the Martinez medallion sparkling around her neck. But it was her smile, genuine, radiant, that captured everyone's attention. When they reached the altar, Antonio placed Isabella's hand in Alexander's, a symbolic gesture full of meaning. The celebrant began the ceremony, but the bride and groom barely heard the formal words, lost in each other's gaze. "The vows," the celebrant announced, and Alexander began. "Isabella," his voice was charged with emotion, "we started out as rivals, became allies out of necessity, and now we're here not out of obligation or convenience, but out of choice, out of love. I promise to be not just your husband, but your partner in every way. I promise to love not just you, but our son, with all the strength in my being. And I promise that every day will be a new chance to prove that some stories, even if they start out complicated, can have an ending that is not only happy, but true." Isabella took a deep breath, tears flowing freely now. "Alexander, for so long I've lived hiding behind masks of CEO, of responsible granddaughter, of independent woman. But with you, for the first time, I can simply be myself. I promise absolute honesty from now on. I promise to build with you not just a family, but a legacy of love and truth. And I promise that every obstacle we face will be just another opportunity to prove that we have chosen the right path." When the rings were exchanged, their son moved vigorously, as if he too wanted to take part in the moment. Alexander smiled, his hand instinctively finding Isabella's belly. "By the power vested in me," the celebrant continued, "I pronounce you man and wife." The kiss that sealed their union was interrupted by emotional applause. Catherine and Antonio embraced, tears streaming freely down their faces. The reception that followed was intimate and elegant. During the first dance, as they moved smoothly to the sound of an old ballad, Isabella whispered, "He's dancing too." Alexander laughed softly, feeling his son's movements, as father and son should already do. Later, As the sun began to set over Manhattan, the guests gathered for one last toast. Antonio Martinez stood up, his glass raised, to the union not just of two people, but of two families. To the Rhodes Martinez, may the future be as bright as this day, Catherine added. And to little Antonio, who will soon arrive to prove that love, even born out of the most unexpected circumstances, is the most powerful force there is. Isabella and Alexander looked at each other in surprise. Were your parents? Catherine smiled. We have our means. When evening finally arrived, the last guests said their goodbyes. In the now silent garden, Isabella and Alexander stood for a moment, watching the lights of Manhattan. Mrs. Rhodes, Alexander whispered, kissing her forehead. Mr. Rhodes Martinez, she corrected with a smile. Rhodes Martinez, he repeated, savoring the sound. A new beginning. For all of us, Isabella added. Her hands intertwined over the place where her son was growing up. The gentle November wind carried promises of change, of new chapters and new beginnings. For Isabella and Alexander, it was the beginning not just of a marriage, but of a journey that had started with secrets and lies, and which now, through love and truth, was finding its true purpose. On the horizon, Manhattan shone as a silent witness to a story that proved that sometimes the greatest treasures are born in the most unexpected places, and that love, when true, has the power to transform not just hearts, but entire legacies.